Hello, Scuttlebutt listeners. I am William, and I'm here today with Vic.
Hey,
And right before we start today's awesome interview, it is Monday, and we are excited to promo the beginning of Modern Day Marine 2023, which starts this week. Vic and I will be there. We will have a MCA Scuttlebutt booth, and I will be there with MCA Films getting footage as well. So we really hope we get an opportunity to see you, potentially interview you if you're interested. And Vic, do you have anything for him?
yeah, come check us out. We'll be down near the Wargaming Center. We've got a booth. We've got our mobile suite. We've got MCA Films. Yeah, come check it out. Check us out. Like, obviously, we want to get you guys, our listeners, to come and just, yeah, come see us, say hello, and maybe get on the microphone and give us some of your thoughts, and we'll put you on air.
All right, awesome. Well, anyways, enjoy the rest of this episode, and we hopefully be able to see you at Modern Day Marine 2023. Bye.
See ya. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you so much again for joining us. I am Vic. I'm on the solo today. No William, no Nancy. But I will try to not derail this thing right from the get-go, which I feel like I'm already starting to do. But one thing I definitely want to take the time is to welcome. I'm so happy to have Joshua Caldwell here. He is the director of a movie that's coming out soon called Mending the Line. It delves into so many important topics. It really hits home for me as someone who has had some very similar experiences to what is depicted in the movie. And obviously for our listeners, this is something that resonates for service members, families, spouses, and people who are in the sort of mental health game, as you will. So Joshua, thank you so much, man, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk about the movie.
Yeah, and I'm actually excited just to talk to you. You're looking at sort of your body of work, man. You really sort of span the gamut as far as storytelling, film production. Could you just talk us a little bit about sort of your journey to getting into the director's chair and sort of what started you off in this on this wonderful path?
Yeah, I mean, I always had an interest in movies. My dad was a big moviegoer, and back in the 80s when I was growing up, and 90s, it was like, so many great movies were coming out, and I kind of got into it. I would see a movie like Batman or Robin Hood or Huck Finn, whatever, and I'd like organize the kids in the neighborhood, and we would like act it out, and so that was
Yeah.
my early touch on directing, I guess. I had no concept of what a director did or even that how movies were made. I just knew, I wanted to live in those worlds. I very quickly realized I had no interest in acting, but was very interested in sort of the behind the scenes. And there was a really great show on Discovery Channel called Movie Magic, which was this peek behind the scenes, especially in the 90s when you had these movies like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 and Apollo 13. And the show would look at the special effects. They would look at like Stan Winston, how he created the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, how they did the T-1000 for Terminator, just really, really cool stuff. And really gave me a peek into the movie making process. And that got me really sort of interested. And then in high school, we had a really great program. We had a 2 period a day video production class, and we had Avid editing systems and digital cameras. And so I very early on got to start, practicing and starting to learn how to do it. But then even more important than that, at my high school, we had this kind of like history of the sort of student body officers would make these parody films of whatever film was popular at the time, and they would
Oh,
show it to
cool.
the entire school. And this was such a unique thing. Maybe more people do it now, but I knew at the time very few were doing it. And I just had to be involved. And a buddy of mine got involved with that and started making those. And so I clamored on in whatever way I could. And, it was great because you got to actually not just like it was like pre-YouTube, right? Now, YouTube, you can put it out
Yep.
there and people can see it. But at that time, unless you were somehow, I don't even know how you would get people to see your movie, maybe like in a film festival or something like that. But as a 18-year-old, like who's nobody's programming that movie. So, it was a chance to just show this school or have like 1,200 people watch your film and see like what was working and what wasn't. And it was really around this time that it really cemented for me that I wanted to make films. So, that said, I did not go to a film school. I went to Fordham University in New York City. I just started making movies on my own. Fordham had a really fantastic acting program. So like that was a big part of it. Like I got to work with like great actors. In fact, there's actors that are in my class and the class above me that have gone on to do pretty sizable things in Hollywood. And so I just got the chance to like hone that aspect of it. Right. And made a bunch of not great movies. Made one that was okay, but that one got me an MTV Movie Award right after I graduated, a Golden Popcorn. And that kind of kicked off. Well, I wouldn't say that kicked off my journey to Hollywood, but that brought me to LA. And I basically started hustling and directing and writing and whatever I could, and ended up working for the creator of CSI for a couple of years, doing a lot of stuff in the digital space for him, and then made my first feature Layover. And after that, it was took off from there.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that idea because I'm a '90s kid too, and there is such a it seems like such a cultural shift where now it seems like kids these days, right? Here I am, the old crusty guy, but kids these days are the current generation. When they think about generating content or doing these sorts of things at the grassroots level, there's always this sort of eye on how many followers can I get from this? And then it seems like from your standpoint, it was like, how can I make my friends laugh? Or how can I just like entertain the people
Right,
sort
right.
of around me?
Or just even, I can't believe I get to do this. I can't believe I get to make these things, and show it to a whole audience of people. Like it was cool, but I very easily slipped into it, meaning like it felt very natural to me. It felt
Yeah.
very sort of right, and I feel most at home basically on film sets. And so I feel like that's my element. A lot of people, even directing, like it's incredibly stressful. It's a very challenging thing. That's why a lot of people say they want to be a director, and then they try it and they're like, oh no, I don't want to do this. And
Right.
to me it's like that's where I'd almost not want to be anywhere else, than sort of on set dealing with those issues and getting to watch actors perform, and sort of running the show, and that's just something that's a space that I really thrive in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about what genre then do you feel like are in the most this is the most comfortable for you within that space because you've done so many things. What is it that what are the kind of stories that you like to tell?
I mean, I would say my sensibilities lean most towards drama, which is unfortunate because drama is hard to make these days. Drama tends to not do well sort of overseas. And so people shy away from it, especially in the indie, I mean, indie films do, but like in terms of like getting your stuff funded, and, people are leaning more into the horror, thriller, action space, which I don't mind. Action's fine. And I really like thriller, but I'd say that like the movies that have done the best for me have been, these dramas, and so, because I kind of, it's interesting because I grew up in like, again, watching movies in like the '90s, and to me, that was such an amazing sort of, sort of meshing of filmmakers, individualistic filmmakers' aesthetic with like big budget studio films, right? I mean, you had
Hmm.
guys like Soderbergh and David Fincher and Clint Eastwood and Michael Mann, and on and on and on, making these really, in some cases, dramas, like, but making these really great adult, oriented films that were not really thriller, not really action, um, and just bringing their own thing to it. So that's really cemented in my own sort of approach and my own aesthetic, is like finding ways to like, stand out as a filmmaker, but also tell commercial stories, tell stories that are going to appeal to a wide audience. I mean, my two favorite movies of all time are The Insider and Traffic, and so that's sort of where my sensibilities lay. But sort of, yeah, I mean, I'm just not a comedy guy. I don't do comedy is a very specific thing, and I don't really spend time in it, and spend a lot of time doing it. Doesn't mean there isn't humor in the stuff I do, but sort of a comedy forward centric type of film is not really my thing. But otherwise,
Yeah.
anything that's sort of on the drama side, whether that's thriller or action, that's sort of where I live right now.
That's cool. And then, I mean, especially as we started, we lean a little bit into Mending the Line. You see a lot of sort of those, so the overlay of some of the genre, especially when you start looking at a military movie that isn't just a shoot 'em up sort of, spaghetti Western style. I mean, there's a lot of that goes into the storytelling because it's a human experience, right? It's not just sort of a beating your chest sort of propaganda film. You're looking at veterans and actions within the military context, but that context is centered within the human, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not, it's certainly more Rambo 1 than like Rambo 3, kind of thing, where it kind of just went into this whole just shoot 'em up thing. But Rambo 1 like is really about PTSD in a big way. It's about this
Mhm.
guy who's like severely affected by war and just like gets, kind of attacked by these guys. It was very much a sort of like, Vietnam versus the protesters type of world, And so anyway, but yes, I mean, I think that like, you know, the tragedy of war is that war is fought by humans, and there is, people suffer as a result. They suffer directly as a result of being killed or injured, and they suffer, sort of indirectly through, the sort of effects of being there, and even more so. Like, I mean, it's really fascinating to me that only 5% of active duty military will ever see combat, and yet something like 50% putting claims for PTSD benefits. And
Mhm.
Sebastian Younger, did a lot of research into this, and he was looking into it. And it was really kind of interesting. It's not just, the effects of PTSD is not just related to combat. It's related to the sort of loss of that brotherhood, sisterhood, that camaraderie, right? Like the experience, and I am, I'm not a veteran, so I can't speak directly to it, but this is what I understand it to be is it's the loss of that kind of like group, sort of experience, and the return to sort of a very alienated individualistic world. So it's, to me, it's yeah, it's definitely it's a human story. And I think like one of the things that, you can do is it's really difficult to understand things through abstractions. 10,000, 3,000 veteran, 3,000 military killed, X number, like it reaches a point where you can't process it. And the only way to really understand sort of the experience of war is to understand it on an individual story, you know, and that is sort of what the movies that do well, right? That tell these kinds of stories do well. That's what they focus on. It's not about these big battles. It's about the person that's experiencing those battles. And so, yeah, like, Mending the Line has certainly got a bunch of different approaches into it. Obviously, more so than you need the audience to sort of understand where John's coming from, where Coulter's coming from in his experience in Afghanistan. And then really once you're out of the action element, you're into, more of the drama, but the other thing is you want to entertain people, right? It's life is not consistently depressing or consistently like dramatic, right? Like there's humor and there's not romance, but there's connection, and so the way that sort of Steven, Camilio, who wrote the film, weaved a lot of that in and out throughout this story, I thought was really magnificent.
Yeah, agreed. And one of the as I'm looking at sort of the stuff you've got there in your background, one of the themes that sort of brings all of this together is fly fishing. And am I correct that you are an avid fly fisherman?
I am. I'm not the best fly fisherman, but I've only been doing it for about 6 years now. But yes, no, I mean, fly fishing has truly become one of my passions, and something I do very, very often. And that's why, like, when this movie came around to me, because I had, a lot of people that knew me when I started telling them about this film. My director of photography and my manager, well, not my manager, he knew about it, but like, I started talking, like even my wife, she was like, how did you not come up with this idea, right? Because it just seems so like I'm like, I had nothing to do with it, like, it was all Steven. Steve and I didn't know each other before working on this film, and but yeah, fly fishing has certainly become a major passion of mine, and that's why I really felt so I just felt like I've got to do this. I didn't want this film to be lost to, a sort of TV director who's looking to do his first feature, who has a ton of experience, but is not a fly fisherman. I thought that, it was really important that whoever was at the helm had an understanding of what this sport was and why it's so um, transformational to the especially veterans, but anybody who's experiencing trauma. How this sport can be transformative for them in their lives, and so I have a very small sense of that. Again, I don't personally have any kind of trauma in my life, but being somebody that lives in his head, um, fly fishing is a welcome, you know, step away from the desk, so to speak. You're doing a lot of head work. It's a knowledge based, sort of job, directing and writing, and going out on the water. The beauty of fly fishing, and this is why I find it to be so effective as therapy, is that to fly fish correctly, you cannot you have to be in the present. Like to fly fish correctly, you have to be in the moment, existing in the moment. And the reason for that is that it's not, spin fishing. You can kind of stand on the bank or sit in a chair and cast it out and just like very lazily reel it back in, and you'll catch fish that way. But the act of fly fishing means you have to go to the fish, which means you got to get in the water, which means you're standing in a current and you're feeling that pressure pushing against your legs, and your legs are making 1,000 different micro adjustments to stay upright, and you're trying to cast your fly line, which is not an easy thing to do. There's a very precise sort of way of doing it that will get your fly out there. And so you're focused on that, and then you're focused on your drift, because effectively, if you're fishing dry flies, like your drift might be a foot long or 6 inches, and then you got to pick it up again, right? So you are constantly sort of doing things, and the act of doing that sort of short circuits that trauma loop that a lot of people are
Yeah.
experiencing, where they talk about how they can't get out of that trauma loop, like they can't escape it. The act of fly fishing interrupts that, because to do it correctly, you can't be thinking about anything else. And I think that's sort of indicative too about a number of other things, right? But we talk about fly fishing in this movie, but you can see across the country various forms of therapy that extend well into other sports. You've got surfing, right? Surfing is the same thing. If you're not thinking about it in the present moment, you're not going to do well,
Yeah.
right? Equine therapy, working with horses. Like a horse is a live animal. Like you have to be present with that animal in order to do it right. So like these kinds of sort of sports or activities can be very valuable to people who can be stuck in that loop. And that's why you're seeing, not only with veterans, but you're seeing it happen with cancer survivors. You see it happen with other trauma survivors. Like, so it's a pretty significant thing, and it was something I wasn't fully aware of, when I got involved with the movie. Obviously, I had heard about like Project Healing Waters, and I knew sort of like about the idea of it, because the fly fishing is very, very intertwined with veterans. But really, the extent of how powerful it is didn't come into focus for me until Stephen and I got to go on a fishing experience with the guys over at Warriors in Quiet Waters, who became a real foundational partner for us on the film. And they basically take post 9/11 combat veterans, they fly them out to Montana, they give them waders and reels and boots all for free, they get to keep them, and they take them fishing. And we sat on the stream and listened to these guys tell us about how, again, I keep using this word, but like how transformational this experience was for them. I mean, one guy told me, he's like, man, the first time I caught a fish, like I started bawling. I was crying. And he's like, I have no idea why. Like, I don't know where that came from, but it was this sudden welling up of emotion. And, he said that when he was letting, that fish back into the water, releasing the fish, he was like letting go of everything that he had been holding in. And when you hear that, you really go, okay, I think we've got something here. We have a story that is really going to connect with people. And then that coming back to sort of the idea of why I wanted to make the movie and fly fishing was, this means we got to get it right. We got to get the fly fishing right. right? We got to get the portrayal of the Marines correct. We got to get the portrayal of PTSD correct. We got to get the portrayal of the VA as correct as we can within the limitations of a 2-hour film, And so
Right.
that all that became very, very important. And I think that, if we are going to do justice to these sort of real life versions of our story, right? If we, because this story is happening all across the country. If we're going to do justice for that, we can't be having people hold the fly rod wrong or do stuff that is, incorrect and inaccurate to the story that we are trying to tell, because then they're not going to watch it. And I had a lot of military guys and veterans tell me, I can't watch movies about, the military, because it's so fake and not real. And I was like, okay, that's a good challenge for me. Like, I'm gonna make the movie that you can watch and be satisfied with.
Yeah, and so for our listeners, just to clarify, so the movie Mending the Line is a story about a Marine who is wounded in Afghanistan and returns home, is struggling with his transition and is sort of uh, reacclimat- reacclimatization back into society, has a desire to return to active duty, but then meets through this VA treatment facility, meets a Vietnam veteran who is a local legend fly fisherman, and these two veterans come together. The Vietnam vet teaches this young Marine to a way to use fly fishing as a treatment for his trauma. Um, so what was sort of your entry into fly fishing? And then do you see, I know you mentioned obviously that you don't have a military service, but was there a similar entry point that sort of comes out here in the film as well? Some experience that you've sort of tangentially shared with the audience?
Well, I think I got started in fly fishing because I always had a loose interest in it, right? I mean, my grandfather was a fisherman. We would go fishing, not fly fishing, but we would go up to like Alaska and go up to Canada and do some like salmon fishing. And I always really enjoyed it, and I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I didn't fish much there, a little bit of here and there with lakes and things like that. Um, but obviously I saw river runs through it when I was young, and sort of the notion of
Yeah.
fly fishing always stuck with me. But then I moved to New York and lived in LA. And of course, now I discovered that you can go into Central Park and fish for carp and panfish. And that in LA, you could go fish the LA River for carp, which is becoming such a huge sort of part of the sport. But at the time, I had no idea, And so, but then I moved to New York and, I was trying to think of something to do. And, um, and I ended up taking a 2-day Orvis class and up in Santa Nona. And, it was just it was cool. It was like a 2-day introduction. I mean, they fly through it, and you get a rod and a reel and but I just really instantly loved the whole thing about it. And basically then started fishing, couldn't figure it out. Spent a whole season just messing around in the water and having not catching anything, And then I met a guy through Instagram actually who showed me a style of fly fishing that's called Euro nymphing, which is sort of different than the dry fly presentation, but it's a sort of subsurface type of fishing with a tight line, and it's a really really effective way of catching fish. And I started catching fish, and then it just sort of spawned from there. So I got into it just kind of looking for something to and then of course, what's really crazy is I discovered that basically where I moved to was essentially, the Catskills, just below the Catskills of New York. The Catskills are effectively where is the birthplace of American fly fishing. And so I discovered that I was basically an hour away from some of the most storied waters, the Willowwemoc, the Beaverkill, these amazing rivers, the Esopus, that was like fishable, and so I was like, oh man, this is great. And so it's just become a thing. But I guess what I brought to the movie was less about my own personal experience and just knowing the very tiniest of ways that it helps me knowing how, exponential that can be for somebody that is really experiencing a severe amount of trauma, and it was really just, my desire as a director to make sure that we did as great a job as we could, making effectively the second fly fishing movie ever made. So, and that was just important to me as a lover of the sport. I wanted to make sure we were getting it right, and we had the appropriate support and the appropriate, people on board to help make sure we got it right. And so that was really my driving force, because again, kind of what I said before is like seeing, the more I learned and the more I delved into sort of the nature of again, using fly fishing as a way of healing from PTSD, not healing, way of sort of managing and as a form of therapy for those with PTSD. I just felt like I wanted to do, honor to the sacrifices that those guys had made. And this felt like the right film to do it with. And so, to me, it was just integral that this story be told right, and it be told in a way that does it with the honor and respect that these guys and that these men and women deserve, for the sacrifices they made for our country.
Sure. Well, I think that you definitely, your passion for the sport, it definitely comes through on the screen. Just hearing you talk about the experience of fly fishing, it almost seems as if you're talking like you're intentionally bringing forward this allegory of what those suffering from PTS sort of go through on this daily basis. This idea that like I'm in this current that's constantly pushing against me. It's cold, it's isolating. I have to be in the moment, and then using the techniques and the skills of fly fishing to sort of break you out of that loop and to appreciate being in that moment, even though you're very much having this sort of push and pull with those forces around you. So I think that
Well, think about what fly fishing does. It gets you out of the house. It gets you in and amongst nature, which itself is healing.
Yep.
Right. It forces you to live in the present moment, which is what a lot of these guys and women, by guys I just mean everyone, but
Yeah, right.
what a lot of these guys are unable to do, right? To sort of step outside of that loop. They cannot live in the present, and it gets them active, right? And not only, and it does in a lot of ways put you back into a group, right? You got fishing buddies, you got, and that those kinds of things are what, sort of lead to
Mm-hmm.
a very profound change for these guys. And so, at least that's sort of what I've experienced. That's what I've seen, and it's not really, it's not really about fishing.
Yeah. And there's that scene when Coulter first goes out, and the Brian Cox's character, I forget his name. He First thing they do, Coulter wants the first thing he wants to do is to get in the water, and this veteran of war and of fly fishing tells him, no, like the first thing we do is we sit and we observe and we see, we react to what the environment is presenting to us. We don't go and try to shape it and massage it, because you're just going to screw it all up. So I thought that was really sort of a beautiful scene. It reminded me, you mentioned surfing. For me growing up surfing, that was always the first thing you do. You don't just like grab your board, wax it up, and then jump in the water. You've got to watch. You've got to see where are the swells, where's it breaking, where's the. So, anyways, I thought that was such a beautiful scene. So yeah, let's just jump full in. Let's just jump full into the movie. So, Mending the Line. First and foremost, I wanted to say like how visually stunning this movie is. There were a couple scenes in the beginning where it almost looked like it was like from the Montana like tourism board because of some of the scenes and the shots that you guys had. It was great. What was that process like, sort of doing the, I guess, the location scouting and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, when you're shooting in Montana outside, you don't have to do a whole lot. You just point that camera in any direction, and it does a lot of the work for you. I mean, a lot, all the visual credit goes to my director of photography, Eve Cohen, who I've worked now. This is our third film together, and she's fantastic. And we really understand. We have a great chemistry in terms of our work and our collaboration together. She gets what I'm going for. And she knows how to make things really beautiful. And I think for us, it was about treating the audience to a subjective experience. I'm not sort of an objective filmmaker. I don't tend to shoot stuff with this kind of objective lens. I like to use the camera to sort of bring the audience into the world of the character. And though we have multiple characters in this film that are all equal in a lot of ways, Coulter's really our way in. And so the film, what's interesting is if you notice it, kind of the first half of the movie, at least every time we see Coulter, there are no aerial shots. There are no real beauty shots of Montana. There is the one in the beginning where we see Brian fishing, and then that's it. And you do not see them again until Coulter first comes to the river. And that was really intentional and incredibly difficult to restrain ourselves in that way, because you are in Montana and you do want to see the beauty of Montana. But I felt that I wanted to take the audience on Coulter's journey. I wanted to cement them into the violence and chaos of the opening battle scene. And then I wanted to take them into sort of Montana. But the thing is, when Coulter early on gets to Montana, he doesn't care about Montana. Right. Montana to him is a way station on his way back to being a Marine. And so when you first see, say, Livingston, we don't show this beautiful, aerial shot of Livingston. You see Livingston through the window of the van that Coulter is riding in. And that's intentional. It is kind of blocked by the window. And so the first half of the movie is actually somewhat claustrophobic, because that's where Coulter's head is. He's not seeing the world around him. Even when we're outside, we're close up on him and blurred the background. We never go to these big, nice wide shots. And it's not until Coulter actually is ready to see the Montana that exists in front of him that we then allow the audience to see the Montana that exists in front of them. And that's when he first goes to the Yellowstone River. And so, obviously you still want stuff to look good and look beautiful, but we had a very specific aesthetic in terms of how we wanted to approach this, and we wanted to cement it into Coulter's sort of first person experience of what Montana looks like and his experience there and how it changes for him, because then you've got the audience going on the exact same ride. By the time you get to that beautiful crane shot over the Yellowstone River, the audience has been clamoring and waiting to see something of Montana. At that point, then you've got them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely comes through the shots that you had, with Coulter in the hallways. His I guess I don't want to call it a dorm room, but his dorm. That it was very confining. The lighting was shot in such a way too that you could definitely feel sort of this canalization,
institutional, and
yeah, that was really, really well done.
Yeah, and even just from a color perspective, staying away from sort of the more naturalistic colors with all the interiors and all that kind of stuff, because we really wanted to contrast sort of the power of nature, right, against the sort of more institutional framework of the VA. And again, not setting out to make the VA the bad guy in the movie. They're certainly not. But just for the sake of the story,
it's Coulter's headspace, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how Coulter's seeing it. We're not demonizing them. We're demonizing them through Coulter's point of view, which is a very different thing, right? And but also for the sake of the story, we need him to get out and fly fish. So there's got to be something got to not work for him, although it does work for a lot of other people. We have the scene where they're in the group, right? Obviously, Coulter is not thrilled to be in that group and is not responsive to it, but other guys, I mean, Saul, who plays the gentleman, he's the double amputee, who's telling his story. He obviously says that group has been wonderful for him. Right. So like that's the sort of line we needed to draw. It's not working for Coulter, just as it doesn't work for a lot of other guys, but that doesn't mean it isn't possible for it to work. Right.
Right.
So but anyway, yeah, I mean that was visually, obviously we're in Montana. We wanted to take advantage of Montana. We wanted to see the Absaroka Mountains, which were unfortunately somewhat obscured by the smoke that we experienced when we were shooting. We were shooting in August of 2021. Excuse me, and just had terrible fires in Washington, California. And as a result, the skies are just very hazy, unfortunately. Now, the rest of it looks good, but, we wanted it, again, we want to tell a beautiful story. And I think that like the way that we, Eve sort of lit the film and staged the camera and all this kind of stuff ended up reinforcing, the sort of journey that the audience goes on with Coulter, and it's a bit like a river,
Yeah.
There's sort of like there's some rapids in the beginning, and then it's sort of like gets into some bumpy water throughout, and then it's sort of like evens out and becomes a nice big pool where you're just sort of slowly floating through, right? Like it's very much a visceral or it's very much a subjective experience for the audience. But yeah, I mean, it's Montana. Like you got to make it look good.
Yeah. Well, it is really interesting to me, and I think you've sort of answered this question already. But as you do sort of get into that more expansive point of view of Montana, the landscape itself almost becomes a character. So I know that the main storylines are within your three main characters, but then it almost is like Montana becomes a fourth character because it is something that seems to bind all of them as they're going on their separate journeys. Was that intentional, or that come out as you guys were putting it in, like, sort of as you're producing and coming up with the scenes and filming and shooting? Did that come out, or was that always sort of the intent?
No, I mean, that sense of place was always there. Stephen lives in Bozeman. He wrote it while he was living in Gardner, down at the entrance to Yellowstone. So the sense of place was insanely, the sense of place of this film was in the script. It was in the DNA of the script, and I think Steven, captured it really beautifully. There was early discussions about, oh, well, do we shoot this somewhere else? Do we shoot it in a different state? Do we shoot it in a different, part of Montana? And I just said, well, if we're going to do that, let's just change the location. Like, I don't want to try and like fake it for Livingston and for the Paradise Valley. I just don't think it's going to, like, I don't get the point of that. Like, if we're going to if it's going to take place if it's going to be shot in Canada, let's just stage it in Canada. You know what I mean? Like, and so, but not that I wanted to do that. I was very much saying we should just shoot here in Livingston and just make it happen, because the reason for that is that the sense of place was so ingrained in the script, right? And so I think that like there's a reason why Montana is such a major fly fishing destination for people. But the thing is, you can't separate place from fly fishing. Fly fishing takes you to really beautiful places, and it's hard to sort of separate the two.
Yeah.
They go really hand in hand. And I think that's also what's sort of what's so powerful about for veterans coming out with like Wars of Quiet Waters. Like they're not just like fishing a stream here in New York or something like that. I mean, fishing on the Yellowstone is an extraordinary experience, and floating down that river is just insane, and so these guys come out here from all over the country, or sorry, they go out to Montana from all over the country, and it's hard to not be in awe of that.
Right.
And so that's really, with Coulter, like Coulter didn't grow up in Montana, right? He's not from there.
Yeah, it was his buddies
Yeah, like because he just doesn't have, he doesn't have family. The Marines are his family, right? So we sort of devised that character to be like that. And we sort of, you know, we sort of worked with, Sinqua and I sort of talked about like culture probably being from, more likely from an inner city, background, and found sort of his family in the Marines, and found his buddy in Blitz, and it just was this crazy weird happenstance that he gets sent to Montana, but it is that bit of fish out of water story, and I think that was a big part of the story we were telling. But I think that it's just Montana. Even being there, I'd never been to Montana before we started shooting. Um, and so as we're scouting and as we're looking at the place, like we really are just saying, how do we make the most of it? So right, like we know we want to shoot on the Yellowstone. There's sort of a Spring Creek thing that was described, and I said, well, what if we shot on Depews, which is this world famous Spring Creek in Paradise Valley, and that's where a lot of the montage stuff is shot. That's where they go when they go take Lucy, and then we had this opening and closing scene, and I thought, like, well, we should shoot it on the Gallatin. For those that don't know, the Gallatin River is where they shot A River Runs Through It. River Runs Through It takes place on the Blackfoot, but at the time the Blackfoot was so polluted when they shot A River Runs Through It that they couldn't shoot there. So they decided to look at Livingston and Bozeman, and they shot on the Gallatin. And so the scene where Coulter and um, Ike are fishing in the beginning and the end of the movie is shot in the same place where Old Norman is fishing at the very end of A River Runs Through It. So that's our little nod to that world. And so, it just becomes very easy to put the characters out into the world and then just point the camera at them and get something really beautiful.
Yeah. Well done in that regard for sure. Um, as we're talking about veterans and veteran support, it wasn't just so much that you guys had veteran support of the movie, you actually had veteran support in the movie.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
correct?
right.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the folks that were actually on camera?
Yeah, well, I mean, the place it starts with is you start with, okay, we've got a movie about the military, specifically the Marines. How do we pull this off? You know, and we had this big fight scene, this big battle scene. And initially we were exploring just shooting at Montana and trying to find something that looked not like Montana
Sure.
where we could shoot this scene, and maybe we stage it at night, and this whole thing. And then one of our producers, Kelly McKendry, reached out to the U.S. Marine Corps Entertainment Liaison Office. And for those that don't know, every branch has this sort of liaison office where they, partner with Hollywood as long as the script, is appropriate. But like Top Gun, right? Top Gun worked with the Navy, on their movies. And so this was the same thing. And basically, we submitted the script, we submitted an application, and they reviewed it, and they said, this is something we'd like to support. And we have a facility down at Camp Pendleton uh, that is basically like a, Afghan village or Iraqi village. It's our immersion training center, and if you want, you can shoot there. And that basically changed the game for us, especially with that opening scene, because look, there's definitely other sort of sets, like especially in LA, where you can shoot, but you're paying for that, you're renting it, and you're building it out, and you're production designing it and dressing it.
Yeah.
And we got to shoot at Camp Pendleton for free, and they provided the location, they provided the equipment, they provided the vehicles, they provided all the tents, and then they provided a contingent of like 30 Marines who helped us out, and they're the guys in the background. The sort of four main characters are all actors, but all the rest in those scenes are active duty Marines, and and they also provided technical advisement. So that just totally changed the game in terms of that opening scene, and really authenticating it in the eyes of those watching it who have been there and experienced it. And then beyond that, when we were in Montana, we actually shot those in reverse order. So we shot the opening scene at the very end. But in Montana, we definitely sought out as many vets, as we could to participate, and including, I mean, our producers. One of our producers, Scott McLeod, he's an Army vet. Kelly McKendry's an Army brat. Her dad was at West Point. Steven's dad was in the Army in Vietnam. My grandfather was, a U.S. Navy pilot, and he ended his career as a commander in the U.S. Navy. And so there's like that contingent among us, that really has a connective tissue to this film. And then, yeah, and then we really sought out just getting as much of the real stories we can. So like in the group scene, um, we cast this guy named Saul Martinez, who is a local bowsman, and he's the gentleman, the W amputee, and basically brought him in. I said, just tell your story, like just
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what to say, like you've done this, you know what to say, and so I wanted to capture a lot of the guys in those scenes, in those group scenes, are former military or veterans, and so it just felt, why not? Right. Like, we felt they would also be willing to come out and do it. Right. Because of the nature of the film. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, that level of support and participation is certainly important, and they're going to bring stuff to it that you can't invent, and,
Sure.
and,
Well, I mean, there's such a level of authenticity there. Even, just seeing the scenes, it was like those guys are definitely vets. Like they're not just pulling people off the street. Like it seemed very, very much like an intentional
yeah,
thing.
and obviously, look, you're a movie, you do the best you can.
Mhm.
You're not gonna get it right 100% all the way, right? But are we at least sort of trying to attain an emotional truth? Are we trying to get it right? Are we doing the best we can? And that was important. And so, and even though he doesn't play a veteran in the movie, obviously Wes Studi is a veteran as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and that was another aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah. What was that like then, trying to get these guys' firsthand accounts? Being a Marine myself, I know that Marines are god awful at talking about stuff that they do. Like they'll very much tell you as if you're like filling out an eval on what it is that they've done, but to actually get them to open up and talk about their experiences, sometimes they'll talk about other people's doing things all day long,
Right.
but to get them to
Right.
talk about themselves, it is a painstaking process. What was that like for you guys? Especially to like Marines tend to be very like, um, you know, uh, hesitant to outsider sort of influence. Did you
Well, I think
guys find
yeah,
any?
well, I mean, I think that, look, our movie is about a Marine, but it's definitely not it's not the post recovery experience is definitely not specific to a Marine's experience, and I think that's
Mhm,
important
mhm.
too. Like it's about a
That is,
Marine
yeah.
because we had to pick a branch, um, but it is universal in that regards in terms of veterans as a whole. And so, we just talked to whoever. We talked to whoever would talk to us. We talked to a lot of, Army guys, probably focusing a bit more on like Army Marine,
Mhm.
rather than sort of U.S. Navy sailors, pilots. Not to say that they weren't. I don't know. We just ended up connecting more with the Army and Marine guys, and a lot of the guys were very open with us
Oh,
and
good.
sharing their story. And even a big part of us was we were trying to figure out was in the original draft that Stephen had written. um, he had written Coulter as a guy who was out, like he was done, and he was in this kind of transitional facility, on his way out, and turned to fly fishing. And we were struggling with what I struggled with. My perspective on it was I don't know why he would go fly fishing.
Mm,
Like how do because that's the premise of the movie, so he's got to do it, and it can't just be, well, he goes and does it, right?
right.
And so how do we get him fly fishing? Because I just see it like it can't be that he's done and he's got nothing to do. He's just trying to get over his injuries. And I was sort of curious about, because I knew that there were people, I know of people who are vets who, or they're still active, who have been injured and went back,
Mhm.
right? They've been shot and went back. And so I was like, there must be a mechanism. It doesn't mean that if you're injured, you're out completely. There's got to be a mechanism by which you can go back in. And we were at this Warriors and Quiet Waters FX, and we were talking to a gentleman who was U.S. Army, and I said, he was sort of talking about his transition out, and what he was describing was exactly what I was looking for, which was he had been injured, but the sort of rehabilitation he was going through, like he wasn't necessarily in or out.
Mm-hmm.
He was being evaluated throughout a process. For him, it was quite a long process, but sometimes it's not. That effectively, once I heard that, I said, that's it. Because now, if in the story, Coulter wants to get back in, and the doctor sort of says, well, if you want to try and get back in, you got to do this, then he's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he goes and puts up with all the shit for Mike, in order to, because he knows in the back of his head, if I just can get through this, I'm going to be able to go back home to the Marines. And that was sort of something that now that we have a driver, right? We have a reason why he's going out to do it. And then that allows the fly fishing to sort of secretly embed itself in him in a way that he wasn't expecting. And it was that sort of feedback and that hearing that story that allowed us to then sort of go back and revise what we had in a way that made it a little bit more dramatically compelling. And the other thing he told us was that he's like, listen, man, I was like, physically, I was there. I was back in exactly the same shape. Like physically, I was healed. But what I couldn't see and what everyone else around me could see was that mentally I was not. And that became the deciding factor in whether I went back in me getting back in. And that I understood to be this process, right? Not only are they evaluating from a physical standpoint, can you work your arm again? Can you stand?
Right.
Can you walk? Whatever that is. But they're evaluating you from a mental perspective as well, right? And so, but the guys, what he told me was like, I never thought of that. He's like, but I'm going out drinking and like, doing all this fucked up behavior, thinking it's just totally normal, and not realizing that the mental issue, the PTS, is rearing its ugly head in a way that everyone else can see that, but I couldn't. Right. And so when he found out he wasn't getting back in, it was like devastating. But he was like, it was obvious, when I
Yeah.
look back on it. And so that then again becomes sort of like that became the sort of narrative wheel in our story that allowed us to sort of get Coulter going. Otherwise, it's sort of like, well, I'm out. I have nothing to do. Let me go. And it's not to say like this is not a knock against Stevens' writing. I think that what this sort of illustrates is the value of going out and talking to the guys that have really lived it, and that kind of experience is you can't make it up. I wouldn't attempt to make it up, and I don't think Stephen would either. And I think we both saw the sort of, I don't want to call it a gold mine, but the incredibly valuable perspective that these guys were sharing with us. And it just became, how could we not put this in the script? Another great thing that came from a Marine I talked to, who's now a fly fishing guide, I believe down in Virginia. He's somebody I reached out to early, and he was the one who told me the line about, in the book of Every Soldier's Life. And I know people are going to knock me for us writing soldier, but there was no way to encapsulate everybody. If you wrote in the book of a Marine's life, then all the Army guys are going to say, what about us? Right. So anyway, but the point is, in the book of Every Soldier's Life, the military is a chapter. Everybody that's in it thinks it's the whole story, but it's not the whole story. Right. And so that was told to him by another Vietnam vet, as they were sitting on a river one day. And that kind of perspective, I was just like, oh my God, I've got to use that. We got to use this in the film. And so, this is not a story that you can kind of just go out and make. I've got those movies, like you're not really doing much research. Like you're just kind of inventing it as you go. This really wasn't that story. And so, having the sort of support and buy-in from, guys, either veterans organizations, active duty military, it just allowed us to make a really authentic film, and emotionally authentic film, right? Like even most audience members are not going to understand the scene with the trash, but I bet everybody who's in the military
Oh yeah.
understands the scene in the
No, as
trash.
soon as I saw that scene, I'm like, yeah, I get it.
And that again was something I was less aware of. I mean, I sort of knew I knew generally, but like that was something another he told me this Marine was it's like, man, I could drive down the same street 10 days in a row and there'd be a pile of trash. And most of the time I'm fine. And then one day out of nowhere, this massive anxiety and wave of fear just takes over me. And he's like, and I've been driving by this pile of trash for days, And so I just was like, that was the kind of thing where, again, trying to emulate the experience of having PTS um, is not an easy thing to do in film. And I was looking for every way possible to try and communicate that experience to the audience, or at least um, allow for moments where if you know,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
so, but that kind of stuff was not something I was just going to be able to invent, nor would Steven, And so for us, it became instrumental in the telling of the story that we talk to as many people as we could, and we get as many perspectives and experiences as we could to make sure that we were just telling a story that was honest and emotionally truthful.
Oh man, well, what tip of the cap to you guys for even taking sort of humbling yourselves in that way, because there's so many. It seems like, at least, that there's so many people that I've got a story to tell and I'm going to tell it, and I'm the best person to tell the story, which oftentimes is true, but there's always those perspectives. There's always that nuance, that you just, even for those who have experienced, and sort of like you'd mentioned, like for every person who experienced trauma is not just a veteran thing, but every person who's experienced trauma is going to have a reaction that is nuanced for that person and in that environment that they um, experienced it. Even for those who have done multiple tours, their experiences in Afghanistan do not directly reflect their experiences in Iraq, and vice versa. And
Right.
so, anyways, but the fact that you were willing to be open-minded enough to sort of listen and take in those experiences and then incorporate them into your movie. I mean, I can't imagine it's an easy thing to make changes on the fly, especially to something as critical as a script. But
To me, why wouldn't you? Like,
yeah,
why wouldn't you take advantage of what these guys are telling you? And some stuff didn't make it in, or we couldn't figure it out.
yeah,
But I think that when you hear something and you go, oh, that's it, right?
yeah,
We gotta nail that. And so, um, just being as accurate as possible to me as a filmmaker. I mean, that's the gold mine, right? I mean,
right,
I'm not suggesting that somebody else's traumatic experiences are, benefit to our benefit, but I think that if you're trying to tell a story that connects directly with that audience, the more authentic and the more truthful you can be in your storytelling, the better. And that is only going to come from sitting down and letting these guys talk and share. So, I to me there was no question of us to do it, and I looked at it and just go, I mean, I think it shows in the film. I think some of the moments that
yeah,
everybody highlights, I can very easily point to and say, well, that I didn't make that up, neither did Steven.
right,
You know,
right,
and I think that gets the support from and the buy-in from the guys you want most of. Again, whether it's fly fishing, right? If you fuck up the fly fishing, like, well, say goodbye to that community. Like, they're not watching
right,
the movie,
right,
And if you fuck up the sort of soul, the military element of it, well, goodbye to that community. Like, and then who's left? Like, it's very important that you tell a story that is satisfying and or impactful to the communities that you're making a movie about.
yeah,
And I think to not do so is to ignore the opportunity um, to reach a wider audience and get buy-in support. I mean, I can tell you, like, you know, we made this film. In the fly fishing world, like, we got featured in the June-July issue of Fly Fisherman magazine, which is the premier fly fishing magazine across the country. And there's the level of sort of stamp of approval and support that we got from them um, is incredible. In the same way that, like, getting that stamp of approval from the Department of Defense and the U.S. Entertainment Liaison Office, for the Marine Corps, like, their sort of sign off on this film is like, no, you guys got it right, is very, very important to us. because that means that because that is important to a lot of other people that are going to ultimately watch the film.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be satisfying, and fulfilling on many different levels. But I think just the fact that you guys were sensitive to it, I think you already started off on the right foot. Um, well, as folks are watching this, and again, Mending the Line, coming out June 9th, what are some of the things that you want the audiences to take away from it? You mentioned, you know, if fly fishermen, don't fuck it up for the fly fishermen, but also don't fuck it up for the veterans. What are some of the things that would be, your intention for people leaving this film?
I mean, I think that look, the last movie I made was in a very divisive type of film, and um, it was sort of I wasn't angry, but it was like an angry film, and I won't go into it here, but it was the idea. It was intentionally provocative and pushing
Mm,
buttons and violent and that whole thing. And, but having done that and then having, looked at this film, I just felt, we had as a world, world civilization had just come through a very, very traumatic experience.
sure.
Um, and I wanted to make a movie that was very like sort of positive forward, that was about overcoming trauma, that was about relationships and meeting people and about finding peace. And I think that's why this movie really spoke to me in Steven's script. And I think that that's ultimately, what I want people to take from it, that there is there is something out there for you. And, especially with veterans who, now statistics are varying, but anywhere from 22 to 44 veterans are committing suicide every single day. Um, the tragedy of that is, I mean, astronomical,
Hmm.
but even one is awful. But I think that if there's just somebody can see this and reach out, or it lets people know that there are programs out there, that it's not going and sitting around a bunch of guys and releasing all your feelings, right? It's like that's a turnoff for a lot of guys, I assume. There is something out there. Maybe it's not fly fishing, maybe it's surfing, maybe it's hiking, maybe it's working with horses, maybe it's woodworking, maybe it's any on and on and
Hmm.
on. um, Maybe it's regular fishing, it doesn't matter to me, but I think that there is something beyond it. And I wanted to make a movie that was very much about hope and about sort of, you know, having a positive impact on each other's lives. And it felt like the right time for a movie like that. And so, I would say this movie, if you're not into fly fishing, I think this movie is still for you. It's really, the movie is about overcoming loss, and whether that's loss of identity as a Marine, or as somebody in the Navy, or as an art, right, or like,
Hmm.
or loss of like a buddy, right, or loss of a brother or a parent or a fiance or a husband or a wife, right? That's not all there is. It's not the end of it. And I think that there's opportunity for people to find sort of community in in these different areas of life. And so, to me, I ultimately just wanted to make a movie that made people feel good, and gave them a little bit of hope, and had them leaving the theater saying, I had a really enjoyable time at that movie. And so I hope that's what people take away from it. And I also hope we can help raise awareness for, veterans, and what these guys and these women are experiencing as they come back and transition into civilian life, and the real challenges of that they're facing. And this movie is just a small way of sort of helping to get the word out there. And if that can be helpful, then I think that's fantastic. And so I think that's why so many people have sort of um, come out to support it, because they know this is a very serious issue, um, in many different ways. Um, and at the same time, so many people have experienced that transformational effect, of these kinds of activities. And so, the more that this can show support, the more that we can get the word out there, the more that we can have people who can come and watch this film, the greater the sort of the awareness is going to be for this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think you sort of downplayed a little bit of what your impact could be. It's more than just a small thing. I think a film like this, if nothing else, is going to, because when you think about those folks who have committed suicide, who are struggling with post-traumatic stress and mental health, I mean, it's so isolating, it's so lonely, and I think for something like this to hit on the big screen in a medium that is so accessible, I think it's important for people to know that, hey, you're not alone, and we actually give a shit.
Yeah.
So this is really great, and I thank you for doing this. Where can people see this? So is it are we getting a wide release on the 9th, or is it a limited at first and then?
I mean, I guess you could say it's limited. We're not on 5,000 screens, unfortunately. We're not the latest Marvel movie, but we are going to be in theaters pretty much across the country. We're adding theaters daily, and we'd obviously love if it is in a theater near you. If you go to, I believe if you Google, I'll send you the direct link so you have it
Yes,
in the show notes. But if you
please.
basically
Yeah.
Google Blue Fox Entertainment Mending the Line, you'll get to the page for it from our distributor, and that will have theaters where it's playing as well as showtimes. But if it's not playing at your local theater, call the theater and say, why isn't it playing here? And call it. And so obviously it's really cool to be having a theatrical release, and it will be in theaters pretty much everywhere. It may not be in every town, but it's going to be somewhere in every state. And if you don't happen to catch it in theaters, obviously eventually it will be coming out on iTunes and on digital, and probably on a streamer sometime later this year. And we expect a lot. Obviously, at that point, everybody can sort of see it. But
Right.
I think a movie like this, it needs that kind of theatrical support. Sort of the specialty box office is a little challenged right now, and I think it's been hard hit, and it's still trying to recover from COVID and all that kind of stuff. So the more that people can come see movies like this in the theater, the more movies like this are going to be put out into the theater, and the greater the experience will be for everybody. So I'll check out the link in the show notes if you're looking for a specific theater, and you can also request it, and we'll be hopefully playing for a couple weeks at least, amidst all the fun other blockbusters playing in this summer.
Well, best of luck to you. You definitely got a fan on this side of the team's screens.
Well, thank you.
And where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram's the best place. My handle's at Joshua Caldwell Director, and come for the fish pics and stay for a few fun things about the movie. But that's actually what convinced Steven to be okay with me directing, because Kelly, she was like, oh, he's like a fly fisherman, and Steve's like, yeah, right, like, let's see. And he went to my Instagram. My Instagram is all fishing pics. Like, I mean,
Yes.
you'd be hard pressed to find a movie thing in there. But then he was like, okay, this guy's legit. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, on Instagram, another great place, resources at Mending the Line on Instagram. Like, we're posting content, and we'll obviously be posting stuff like theaters and things like that. That's an easy way to get to, the information. So we're excited, man. I mean, it's really cool. Look, when you're making a movie in the independent world, you never know, and especially these days, so many movies are sort of either going straight to digital or doing this day and date thing, which is not a real theatrical release. It's a very limited release. And so the support from Blue Fox Entertainment to put this out there as an exclusive theatrical is rare. And so we're really excited that people can see it on the big screen. Obviously, I know you probably saw screeners, so you don't get the full scope of it. But if you're able to see it on the big screen, it really just opens up to you in ways that you don't really compare even on a 70-inch television.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is really great. Joshua, thank you so much, man, for being so generous with your time. I'd love to, as we get more of a release, just getting more feedback, maybe have you on again and talk more about this, maybe some more of your future projects. But thank you so much, man, for coming on. This has been really great.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support of the film, and hope your listeners get a chance to see it. And it's always a pleasure to talk about, it's always nice now to be able to talk about the film, right? Like, you work on it for so long, and now it's here, and it's a nice opportunity to share, and it's nice to have people that care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for caring about this really critical issue. And I mean, you got your release during PTSD Awareness Month as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're doing a lot of good work, man. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, man. Best of luck to you with everything you got.
Thanks again.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, or Ty Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.